Cool. Then the next update is, will Google ignore iframes? That was a big discussion that happened, and obviously there is a lot of school of thoughts, and some people are saying Google, if you have iframes on your web page, then obviously Google is going to ignore it. If you don't, if you do, and Google doesn't ignore. So it's just a lot of back and forth, right? And also goes to show, what different kinds of school of thought is out there. So John Mueller jumped in and they says, what? Look, back in the day, obviously Google was not smart enough to know what iframe was. It couldn't go in and read what was inside of an iframe. Now, by the way, let me take a step back and explain to you what an iframe is. Iframe is basically when you go to a page, and some people use iframe to put a different content of a different web page into that page, right? So one great example is if you go to our website, marketandgrow.com/2imshow, and you go to each individual episodes, like for example, this is episode 155, we will use an iframe to embed the podcast, the audio recording into that page, right? Obviously the audio portion of this podcast is hosted on Transistor, which is a different website, but we want to pull that content out of Transistor and put it in part of our web page, right? So we use iframe to embed into it. Now, obviously one school of thought says, if you have an iframe, any content that's within that iframe does not get indexed. The other school of thought is, if you have iframe, or you are giving credit to that page, or you're borrowing credit from that page, and blah blah blah, or Google doesn't ignore it and content doesn't get indexed at all. John Mueller says, no, that's not as easy as that. Now, yes, Google can read what's inside of iframe. It's smarter. However, we definitely encourage you not to use iframe when possible, if possible. And if you're using it, obviously there are different tags you can use, like for example, xframe options header to block iframe completely if you don't want iframe to be any content within iframe to be indexed. Number 2, use the index if embedded tag. This was something covered back a few episodes ago in our show. I know that. So obviously, if you're following it, you're kind of on top of this kind of stuff. And the third is you can use no index robot meta tags or X robots meta tag. Like obviously, these are some of the tags like X dash robots dash tag. If this is something confusing to you or at a high level, you're unsure, of course, you should talk to an expert. Now, the rule of thumb is, if possible, avoid iframe. And obviously there are some unavoidable cases, like for example, in our case, I just gave you an example, which is the Twim show. There is no way I can embed the podcast into that page, into the show notes without using an iframe. So, again, I'm not too concerned about getting that page, the audio indexed. So for me, it works out pretty well. Your case may vary, your mileage may vary. So you need to talk to your website designer and see how can you avoid iframes if possible.